So hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jane Fisher, the library director, and have worked with Sahara Ferruggio to plan this program. I actually had the opportunity to meet Sahara when she did a program in conjunction with the Bailey Funeral Home, and it was called Pints and Planning, and it was at the Center Street Brewery. And went and then actually met with her and planned my funeral because I was so impressed with her and the service that she provides, and just something that I really wanted to do. So let me tell you a little bit about Sahara, and greetings to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. We have a good crowd both in the room and by Zoom. Since becoming a licensed funeral director in April 2016, Sahara has received certification as a funeral celebrant and obtained her Connecticut insurance license to practice as an advanced planning specialist. In 2021, Sahara founded Smart Funeral Planning, a service that allows individuals the opportunity to explore their options, easily compare local providers, and ensure their plan meets their needs as well as their budget. Sahara participates in many events and activities, including death cafes and funeral planning parties all across Connecticut, to expand awareness and provide comfort to those in need. She's on the board of the Connecticut Green Burial Grounds and wishes to have a green burial for herself when that day inevitably comes. Sahara and her husband live in Weston with their 2 daughters, and are really thrilled that she accepted our invitation to help us write our own obituaries. So welcome, Sahara.
Thank you. So as Jane explained, my name is Sahara. I've been in the industry for about 7 years now. Local partners with BC Bailey here in Wallingford. Even though it's only been 7 years for me in the industry, I've always had a passion about the hard conversations. I got into the business with the goal of making death a more comfortable and accepted topic in the mainstream. Grew up with a really interesting perspective on death, as it was introduced to me very early and matter of fact. My mother, Debbie, lost her mom to suicide when she was just 7 years old. And she's carried that with her all her life, obviously. And to this day, almost every conversation I have with my mom, something to do with her mom. So it's impacted her, and it's of course impacted me as well. And now we're able to openly talk about death, and we talk all things about how we can be better grievers, how we can be better supporters of those that are going through grief, how we could be better neighbors, teachers, parents, and humans. After all, death is the one thing that we all have in common, and it connects us. We've all got a story to share. And Jane mentioned that I serve as a pre-planning advisor. I also help with aftercare. So I get to meet all kinds of people in the communities, and you guys would be in awe of how just one person can make such an impact on the world around them. From the cashier at the corner store bagel shop, to the man who walks his dog every day at 7 a.m., to the weather forecaster on TV, we all have a unique and incredible story to share. The question is, what is your story? So whatever your story is, it can definitely be told through a well-written obituary. One of the most common questions I get asked as a funeral director is, who writes the obituary? And what I tell people is, you do. Most often the family is left to write the obituary. And unless a person leaves a self-written obituary, it's up to your loved ones to compose it. There's a lot of pressure on the survivors, especially if they're given a deadline from a newspaper. Oftentimes people want to have the services within the same week, so to only have 48 hours to write this is a big deal. Writing your own obituary is a thoughtful and priceless gift that you can prepare in advance and leave behind for your survivors, because after all, who better to write your obituary than you? So I'm going to play a quick.
So we also could be writing other people's.
Absolutely. This will be a guide for writing an obituary for yourself or for others. You can use these tools in whatever ways you find necessary as the future unfolds. So I'm going to play a quick video, comic relief, just to give you guys an idea about what survivors might go through, some of the emotions that they're faced with when they're trying to write an obituary for somebody who's already passed on. I have sound here.
Passed away on April 10th,
Oh no. I don't know if this is gonna work.
I can hear you. We can hear it pretty good.
I don't know if it's gonna give feedback. So let's see if I can start it over.
Gregory Tonto Oswald is gray, passed away on April 10th. When you take out Tonto, it's your middle name. Yeah, I don't like it. Sounds like a ballad. Well, I have to keep it. It's your story. Exactly. My life. And I left some actor, but I'm the one who writes it. I'm the one who did the continuity of this 35 months. Tell me which one. Greg Oswald was a 6'9" pianist. Okay, I don't think that was true. Yes, it is. You can't see it in my real spot, but I was huge. Fine, continue. Thank you. Greg set Scott off. Okay, that's I don't like contact.
So thank you all again for being here to join me on this special activity. A task that I hope will leave everyone feeling refreshed, rewarded, and reminded of our purpose here on Earth. We each have a short time in this space before eventually death finds us. So for this exercise, I mind you to forget about all the negative associations that you may have come to surround death with. I'll ask you to throw out everything you were ever taught about death, dying, and obituaries. For the next 90 minutes, I'll attempt to share with you an important secret, something that we all know intrinsically, but that we may have likely forgotten while we make our way through surviving in this world as best we can. Death is something that we cannot avoid or overcome. It's something that we simply have to deal with. The sooner that we acknowledge this truth, the sooner that we can somehow find a way of coping with and accepting it. This workshop was created with the intention of being a single tool in a wide toolbox, or a single step on a great staircase of a journey to finding truth and fulfillment in our lives. So thank you again for giving me the space to do this, and thank you for your open minds as we move along. So first, we're going to define what exactly an obituary is. We'll go over the history of obituaries. We'll read some examples together, go over the do's and don'ts, talk about some common elements that exist in almost every obituary, quickly touch on where the obituary may be placed and costs, and then we'll do some drafting. The goal, of course, is to send you all home with a well or decently well-written obituary. And if we have time at the end, I would love to hear some of your stories and get to know you a little more. So what is an obituary? On the screen, there are some definitions that Google provided as a response to what is an obituary. But the definition that I came up with and that I find more fitting is an obituary is a written snapshot of a person's legacy, their impact, their essence, their spirit, their being, and their soul. Now, let's not get too concerned about being poets. We would be wise to start simple and include the most basic elements of an obituary. The true purpose of the publicly published piece is to let everyone know where and when they can pay respects and say goodbye. It's intended to be a formal notice of the news of a death. These days, however, things have changed a bit. So once we get the main details out of the way, we do have platforms available now that allow us to be more detailed, more creative, and more in control of what our final words say about us than ever before. With most obituaries being published online and shared over social media outlets, we have less restrictions on length, and we don't have to meet any hard deadlines for submission, allowing for more time and thought. This gives us more freedom and flexibility to personalize our obituaries. So in 2022, with our more sculptable landscape, not only are we notifying the public of a death, we're also inviting them to remember the person. So not just by attending the service and gathering with all those who knew and loved the deceased, but also by fondly recalling them with the little details that make up what a person is, like the way someone wore their hair, or the sing-song way that they said hello every morning, or the familiar smell of their perfume when you'd enter a room that they just left. Do you see where I'm going? I'd like us to paint a picture with details, because we are detailed. Let's not have our obituary or our life summary essentially be stale and full of lists and facts. This isn't a resume. It's an attempt at capturing how one should be remembered. So let's have fun with this and take pride in the final result. So historically, obituaries were more commonly known as death notices. They were written by the publisher of the paper that they were to be printed in, and they did little more than notify the community of the time and place of the services. If a decedent was really popular or well-known in town, the paper may include a more biographical write-up of their accomplishments and successes. But other than that, obituaries were pretty much simple and to the point. For more than 250 years, we've relied on newspapers to publish and distribute obituaries. Recently, however, newspaper circulations have declined sharply. Not surprisingly, so have printed obituaries. With the average size obituary costing nearly $600, it's not hard to understand why we've seen such a decrease in this trend. Online websites like Ancestry and Legacy.com have taken the place of newspapers as the largest vendor of obituaries. Ancestry has an astonishing 262 million online obituaries dating back to the 1750s.
That's ancestry.com,
Uh-huh.
which you can use with your Wallingford Public Library card here.
So this is a collection of works that documents our existence here as individuals and the impact that we've left. Ancestry now uses AI algorithms to extract this biographical data from centuries of obituaries, birth and death dates, geographical locations, the parents' names next of kin, to automatically populate subscribers' family trees. So looking to the future, it appears as if obituaries are surely here to stay in some form or another. So I'm going to read a bit from a website that I found called How Stuff Works, and the actual creator of this text is Dave Roos. By the mid-19th century, newspapers were regularly publishing death notices submitted by local funeral homes. Before the linotype machine was invented in 1886, every printed letter in the newspaper had to be set by hand. So papers were short and obituaries were brief. A typical death notice from the Philadelphia Public Ledger dated July 3rd, 1851 would be published under the blunt heading "Died." You could see the photo there on the screen. Sadly, infants and young children died in large numbers in the 19th century of now curable illnesses and disease. Unlike adult obituaries, which stuck to the facts, a child's obituary may have included a brief verse of poetry. An example that they give from an 1851 death notice for a boy age 1. Dear Richard's gone to realms above to receive his Savior's dying glove. By the height of the Civil War, published death notices increased to tens of thousands a year, says Todd Godfrey, Vice President of Global Content for Ancestry. As more space and attention were given to obituaries, they began to serve as places for public expressions of mourning. In the February 7th, 1865 edition of the Baltimore Sun, one death notice included a brief eulogy to a promising young man's life cut short at exactly 21 years, 8 months, and 10 days. And this obituary from 1865 read, "The subject of this notice was married but 6 weeks ago. He had just embarked in business and possessed the health and vigor to render it profitable, when the strong hand of affliction was laid upon him, and the form recently so manly was soon prostrate in death." Genevieve Keeney, president of the National Museum of Funeral History in Houston, Texas, says that death notices published in local newspapers also functioned as quasi-legal documents. Since the newspaper was a public forum, a death announcement also served to notify creditors who may want to file a claim against the deceased estate. With the automation of typesetting, newspapers extended at the turn of the 20th century, and more space could be dedicated to death notices and obituaries. And like classified advertisements, newspapers began to charge a fee to publish obituaries, and publishers quickly recognized that there was good money to be made from obituaries. So photo here demonstrates a more modern obituary. It looks like this one was even shared on Facebook. Godfrey from Ancestry says that his company's obituary extractor found 400,000 obituaries in 1900 from around 2 million total newspaper pages. And 30 years later, by the 1930s, that number exploded to 1.25 million obituaries and 2.5 million total pages of newspaper. So it was around this time, the 30s and 40s, that the modern obituary template began to take shape. So here's where we started to see families in funeral homes writing death notices that adhere to the familiar 4-part structure, which would be the death announcement, short bio of the decedent, a survived by section, and then the actual funeral information. So if you look at obituary section of the Richmond Times-Dispatch for July 3rd, 1938, it's a mix of shorter death notices written by families and longer obituaries written by staff journalists and wire services like the Associated Press. The shorter death notices had the deceased person name at the headline, while a longer obituary written by the paper may carry a headline like Mrs. Susan Murdoch dies, writes Monday. Some of the obituaries had pictures of the deceased in their youth, still a regular feature today. And one obituary from 1938 was even written after the funeral and shared an account that the services went well and that Mrs. Coleman was buried at Bellamy. The standard obituary template can be a tremendous resource for experienced genealogists and folks just starting out research on family history, says Hansen of Ancestry. An obituary is like a miniature family tree. So you can kind of start to see how important obituaries are historically. The standard obituary style remained fairly unchanged throughout the second half of the 20th century, and then took a shift again after the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001. This is from obituary expert Susan Stopper with an NPR interview in 2018. In the months following the attacks, the New York Times published short narrative obituaries on each of the nearly 3,000 people that were killed that day. They were fabulous, said Stopper. Everybody was recognized as a whole person, and they had fun anecdotes. They made you cry, they made you smile. And to me, that was sort of when the tide turned in obituaries and people realized that you could bring a person to life and keep them alive in even a shortly written obituary. Stopper theorized that these obituaries started a trend toward more honesty and openness in remembrances. Instead of using coded language like he died at home or she died suddenly, families began to open up about a loved one's addiction or how clinical depression took their life. Families also used the obituary space to educate other young people and families about the opioid and suicide epidemics. Nowadays, obituaries also are more likely to mention that a same-sex partner or an out-of-wedlock child survives the deceased, and a few obituaries even go so far as to say that the deceased will not be missed. So now that you've got a good background and have started forming some ideas about what you might want your obituary to look like, let's look at a few more recent examples. So this one's pretty classically written for a modern obituary. Let's read it together, and then I want to ask you guys what your thoughts on it are. So this is for a woman named Barbara Joanne Davidson, originally from Somersville, transitioned peacefully on Wednesday evening, surrounded by her loving family. Jo, as she was affectionately known, was born in Somersville on May 1st, 1945, to Edith Ann Stevens and Edward Joseph Davidson. Jo will be remembered by her many accomplishments. Jo served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War and was an educator in Ashe County for over 20 years. She was a member of the Highland Baptist Church, where she served as Sunday school teacher and clerk. Her love for animals was apparent by her dedication to animal rescue and adoption. Those left to cherish her memory include her life companion, Alex Maxwell of Springfield, sister Erin Jameson and her partner Chris of New York City, brother David and husband Josh, sister, uncle, wife Sally, Louisville. Okay. Graveside services will be at 11 a.m. Thursday at Rose Hill Burial Park in Springfield. There will be no public visitation. Roseland Funeral Home in Springfield is entrusted with the arrangements. And finally, in lieu of flowers, contributions may be made to the World Wildlife Federation. Pretty familiar? Okay, so moving on to example 2. Now, be open-minded here. Obituaries can be humorous too. So feel free to have some fun with it. This is one a little more spicy. Linda, 72, passed away peacefully at her home in bed on March 8th, 2022. It is believed it was caused from drinking too much rum chata to help her cure her illness. She left behind a hell of a lot of stuff to her son and daughter who have no idea what to do with it all. So if you're looking for a lot of antiques, furniture, a 2021 Buick Enclave with 5,000 miles, and a ton of shoes and purses, you should wait the appropriate amount of time and get in touch. Tomorrow would be fine. This is not an ad for QVC, HSN, or Amazon Prime, whose profits will dip after the loss of a VIP customer. But an obituary for a great woman, mother, aunt, sister, grandmother, great-grandmother, and friend. She was preceded in death by her beloved father. And then I think it falls pretty much into the standard format of explaining when the services will be. So what do you guys think? What are your thoughts in 2022 about both kinds? Okay, see, we want to laugh, so don't worry about offending people. There's a whole Instagram page that I follow. They didn't die, and they have hysterical cutouts from obituaries. So don't think that nobody does it. It's not common, but I think that we will see a trend towards obituaries being a little lighter and personal as we move on. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts. Do shoot for 800 to 1200 words. If you want to leave an impact, you need to do some writing. You also don't want to leave the reader asking when it's going to end. Don't use overly long paragraphs, so try to break it up. Most obituaries are read online these days, and it does become hard to read if they're all clumped together. Try to maintain the reader's interest. Make it personal. Again, I can't stress that enough. Be honest and specific. The details really paint pictures, and we'll get into a little bit more of that as we start drafting our obituaries. And I always like to include a story, because there's nothing quite like a story to paint a picture about who somebody was, right? So if there's a memory that you have in your mind that you'd like to live on forever, other people probably want to hear it too. Don't rush. Like we talked about earlier with the deadlines, there's so many times that a family will submit the obituary and then call me 15 times over the next 30 minutes to make edits because they spelled the name wrong or they left somebody out. So take your time and don't use copyrighted poetry or lyrics. You never want to do that. And I guess if you do, definitely give credit or get permission beforehand. So some of the elements that I think should be included in all of the obituaries that we craft today would be identifying who we're writing about. So I kind of scripted this with the intent of you all writing your own obituaries. But like we were asked earlier, if you are writing this on somebody else, of course, that's fine too. You'll want to include their full name. If they have a nickname that they were known for, you'll want to include that too. So anybody that identified them could know who the person was. You want to include their date of birth, city of residence. Of course, you're going to want to use a word to paint the picture that the death has occurred. So you could select a verb to describe the death. Some people want to use euphemisms. Some people like the idea of just saying that this person died. You can include the date of death, how the person died. That's an option. Sometimes people want to be open with it. You don't have to. This is all just my opinion, but I do like to include the how. If you don't include the how, everybody's going to wonder about it. So it's almost better if you get ahead of that and take the curiosity outside of it. Yes.
The city of residence, is that the city of residence of birth or of death?
I do both. Again, I guess it would also depend on where it was being published. So sometimes people have a couple of different versions, depending on which paper it's going to be placed in. If it's online, it wouldn't hurt to say that they were born in Wallingford, now living in New York City.
And for that example, say they lived in Wallingford when they were born, but the hospital they were born in was in another city. Which one do you put down as the place of birth?
I guess you wouldn't need to get into the literal birth. You could say that, Sahara from Wallingford, Connecticut, or raised in Wallingford, now of fill in the blank. And I could help get creative with certain ways to structure specific situations.
I assume some of those will be left blank and filled in later.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Although I did have one gentleman one time that I met with to do his own arrangements he was planning for, and he gave me his date of death with quite certainty. So he hasn't died yet, but I put the date that he told me on the folder, and I'll be really interested to see if he was able to predict that day, but he, in his mind, said that was told to him and that's the day that he'll be going. So if you think you got it all, you could fill in the blanks, but if you think some of it's left to be determined, then leave them open. The next thing that you'll want to include, of course, is your legacy. And this is what I think takes the most time and creativity to create, because it's more than just filling in the blanks. It's a little bit of brainstorming. So you want to tell this part in the way that you were remembered in life. This could include anything that you associate with: flavors, smells, pets, passions, collections, hobbies, food, etc. Then, of course, we're going to talk about family, who you were predeceased or survived by. I guess that would be more loved ones than family. Any expressions of sympathy or thanks. And finally, the service details, in lieu of flowers, if you'd like to leave instructions for donations. And, you know, what else? You guys tell me what else should be included. So there is no right way to write the obituary, except for that you like it. So this is just an idea. So I want to pull both of these examples up again, and you guys can clearly see that both examples do use all of those elements. So there's anywheres from A through Z in the way that you can kind of craft it together to get the final result. So as we discussed a bit earlier, obituaries are finding their new homes online. I'm not sure what the future will hold, but it's probably a good idea to begin a savings account if you want a publicly released obituary. So let's get into writing our own obituaries, or those for others. And the first stage in doing this, I call the brain dump. So in your packets, find the blank page that you've got. Does anybody need a writing utensil, a pen or pencil? So me personally, I find it really hard to think or begin writing if I have a cluttered mind. And I know I just gave you guys a whole lot of information, and we've got maybe some nerves just about being here doing this in the first place. So I just want to take a minute and stand up and just kind of shake out. Come on, guys. You got to get it out before we can write it.
Jane, I don't know if everyone online got the.
I think they did.
Okay. I know Leah was having trouble getting everybody. So I will.
Okay, so I like to start with the blank page because your obituary should be as unique as you are. So starting with the blank page, just write your name in the middle of the page. And what I did is shown on the screen. That's my example. And then surround your name with any and all of your favorite things or feelings. And this could be literally anything. And I'm just going to go through a list to kind of get your brainstorming going. Could be flavors, smells, pets, work, music, habits, sports, sounds, gestures, physical characteristics, brands, nicknames, skills, talents, passions, collections, hobbies, food, people, places, jewelry, watch, clothing. Try to be specific and think personality as opposed to facts. And really try not to overthink it. Just write down the first things that come to mind. I promise no matter what happens with this page, we do have plenty of time to make changes or work it out. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 or 10 minutes to get through this piece of it.
Could you read that list again?
Sure. Flavors, smells, pets, work, music, habits, sports, sounds, gestures, physical characteristics, brands, nicknames, skills and talents, passions, collections, hobbies, foods, people, places, jewelry, watch, clothing, etc.
You have organizations in there too, I guess.
Yep, organizations are a good one. How are you guys feeling with this one? Does anybody want to share some of the things that they wrote down and that might stimulate others to think of things?
Answer to Thomas, Smitty, PTGS. Those are the nicknames.
Awesome. Nicknames are very important. Anybody else want to share?
Sure. Local history buff, public safety, sentimental. New England Patriot fan. Cheeseburger lover. Cat owner. Non-fiction reader.
Awesome. Great job.
Not necessarily in that order.
Yeah, any order. I mean, that was perfect. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it should be. I think that paints a really good picture of who you are. Some of the things I had, chocolate, rollerblading, my laugh. My husband always says I've got classic laugh that my dad gave to me. Cats, poetry, death, my daughters, the moon cycles. So it could even be interests. Does anybody need more time with this? I don't want to rush anybody. And of course, we've hopefully all got lots of time to get these finished, so. So moving on to writing the first draft of our obituaries can seem intimidating. I know the first part was pretty easy, but we do have a good roadmap and we've already established a lot of the material that we'll end up elaborating on and piecing together. So the following slide will provide a simple structure and an outline for you to start to put the pieces together. But first, I want to show you a funny video that I found online that will make you feel better about moving forward. So no matter what you come up with, it's got to be better than an obituary that was written by a bot. So here's the bot obituary. Right? Yeah, do the sound thing again.
Okay, so a bot wrote an obituary, and it's fantastic. I'm gonna read it to you now. Brenda Tent retired from living at the age of old, surrounded by family and natural causes. And living from birth, Brenda was an avid collector of dust. She had a sweet heart and married her high school. She loved having hobbies and helping her sons to be disadvantaged. She had no horses, but thought she did. The church gave her a lyre because she sang like a bird and looked like a bird, and Brenda was a bird. She owed us so many poems. The funeral will be held in 1977 at heaven. In lieu of flowers, send Brenda more life.
Okay. So this is the outline that I'd like you guys to follow for step 2. This is a good list of the elements that could be included in the first draft. And because we're all doing this together, just in one class, we're going to work with what we've got. But you could take your brain dumps home and ask those closest to you to contribute some of their own associations with you. Sometimes it's hard for us to see ourselves the way that others see us. And more often than not, I do believe that we are much harder on ourselves than we should be. So let's treat this as a self-love exercise as much as anything else. And again, because we're doing this here, I'd like everybody to respect each other in the space. But for those that are more comfortable with speaking or telling stories, feel free to use an audio recorder and record your story or the important parts about your life. And then you could capture the obituary in writing from there. But for now, let's use the brain dump mind map or the word cloud that you've all created and begin to take the elements on the slide and start to sloppily put it together into a structure of an obituary. And let's aim for between 200 and 300 words. So we can elaborate and condense later, but let's aim for 200 or 300 words. And I can come around if you guys have questions. I'm more than happy to help you kind of get these pieces together. Let's take about 15 minutes.
So I have a hard time figuring out words with that when I'm not typing it to get a word count. Is it
Yeah.
Yeah.
like how much is 200 or 300?
Okay, let's do this. So mine was about about 250, that draft there.
Okay, so about a page.
Yeah, about a page.
Yeah.
And then I'll go back to the structure. How's everybody doing?
I didn't really, after I got going, I didn't really get everything in the right order, but I think I have enough idea of it that I could actually probably write it over. and do it.
Okay. Perfect.
I know,
Good. Say 1 more minute for the online people.
okay.
Is everybody else good with 1 more minute? Well, I don't know if we're gonna get to the full 800 today. So final draft, I do want you to shoot for 800, but I don't think we'll have enough time or brain space to come up with everything today. So do your best and then we can elaborate and condense as needed over time. So now that everybody's got a rough, or in my case, a very rough draft created, let's take a few minutes to polish and edit our obituaries. So I want you all to kind of reread what you've written and highlight the most important or entertaining parts in your current piece and then elaborate on those. As you do this, you may realize some things that were left out or forgotten, which of course can be added in. And remember, think about the things that make you you. What things set you apart from others? Again, a particular greeting or a phrase that people come to expect from you, an odd physical feature or characteristic. I like quotes. So I put a quote in mine. A startling or funny quote is always enjoyable. Any strange habits or preferences. Again, laughter is always good relief when reading obituaries. And finally, take a moment to reevaluate details that may be mentioned twice or that may not really have a reason to be included. You can remove those things. So take some time, again, probably another 10 or 15 minutes and mark up your draft pretty good. And then you can go on to writing, which will be like your semi-final or at least the final for today's efforts. And if you need extra paper, let me know too. I can come around with that. Looks like mostly everybody's stopped writing. Anybody still working?
So I'll monitor also the people who are with us on Zoom.
Yep.
In case they want a chance to share as well.
Yeah, because that's what's next, guys.
Yeah.
I hope and encourage that you guys do share. I'd love to meet some of you.
Anybody want to read?
You guys want me to go first? Okay. So here's what I came up with. Sahara Steedle Ferrugio, born in Las Vegas, Nevada in May of 1989, who made her home in Weston, Connecticut, died in her sleep on May 19th, 2049, as she sunk into her final dream. Sahara lived life with a fun-loving and adventurous nature. One of her favorite quotes was, "Life is but a dream." Being a well-traveled explorer of lucid dreaming, what she meant when she said this was, life can be whatever you make it, so why not make it good? Being born and bred in Las Vegas allowed Sahara to fully appreciate the Connecticut outdoors and all the beauty the changing seasons of the Northeast offer. On the rare occasion of a day off, Sahara could likely be found hiking somewhere or another, one of her favorite spots being Devil's Den Nature Preserve, which was conveniently located down the street from her Weston home. And it was a home indeed. Following years of living life on her own after moving out of her father's house at 16, Sahara felt at peace and in place with her loving husband, Chris, and their 2 daughters. Sahara loved Chris for many reasons, but it was his delicious home-cooked meals that really closed the deal. Ever a lover of good food, drinks, and company, Sahara lived a very blessed and fruitful life. Sahara spent the majority of her career in funeral service, helping people navigate end of life and death, 2 subjects which fascinated her endlessly. She was passionate about her job and felt it was her true purpose. Sahara also enjoyed tracking the moon cycles. It helped her believe that she could blame something outside of herself for her ever-shifting moods. She could be stubborn and had a bad habit of becoming overwhelmed with work, but at the end of the day, she was usually grateful, kind, and loved to laugh. Comedy was a great relief for her, providing a balance from her death-filled day job. She inherited her laugh from her father, George, and has passed it on to her daughter, Scarlett, a gene that hopefully continues for many more generations, showcasing the love and enjoyment of existence they all shared. Besides her beloved husband, Chris, Sahara leaves behind her children, Madeline and Scarlett, her brother, Russell, and several close friends. Services will be held at Lachat Farm on the first full moon following the death. Memorial donations may be made to Devil's Den in her honor.
That's great.
Thank you.
You got a whole 28 days to go, so. Just last night, so.
What about you, Jane? Put you on the spot.
Okay, so this was a little bit of like wishful thinking, I guess. Right, because I don't know if these things will actually happen.
Well, life is but a dream.
Yes, okay.
So that's where we're standing from today.
Okay. All right, here goes. Jane Ellen Fisher, born June 28, 1964, New Haven, Connecticut, died peacefully at home after a short illness. Jane was the director of the Wallingford Public Library for 15 years prior to her retirement in 2020-something. An avid reader and lifelong learner, Jane was enrolled in classes and workshops from Spanish to tap dancing well into her 90s. After her retirement from the library, Jane became a personal historian and guided autobiography reader. She loved helping people tell their stories. Jane joined the Wallingford Rotary Club in 2013, and it was there that she met Matthew O'Rourke, the love of her life. Together, Jane and Kevin enjoyed trips in the US and abroad, bicycling excursions, concerts, good food, sitting at a bar, long walks, and winters in Mexico. In addition to her beloved husband, Jane leaves behind her stepson, Matthew O'Rourke, Becca, his children, they're not born yet, so whatever their names are, her brother Stephen, her canine companions, whatever their names are, her BFF, Julie, and her special nieces, Alex and Natalie. Calling hours are such and such to such and such, burial is private. She was predeceased, oh, I guess that comes to come in before the burial hour. She was predeceased by her parents, Judith Angstrom Fisher and Thomas Fisher. In lieu of flowers, please leave a donation to Wallingford's peer-to-peer university, an organization that Jane helped found before her retirement.
Awesome. Love it.
It's a lot of fake stuff in there, but
I like how you include the animals
yeah.
as survivors.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. They are our special companions.
Right.
They ought to be mentioned, right?
I don't want to share all of mine, but I will share the part where I do my animal. And I just wrote that she hopes her husband and her children remember that even though she said no a million times, she relented and let them get a dog who she readily claimed as her own. I think that's the peaceful.
Oh,
That part of my life is a very important one. So
yeah.
I actually saw an obituary for a dog in the paper, in the advisor. I cut it out. It was so great. Yeah, yeah. In the picture of it.
I know a lot of them now are saying like, use her companion, furry companion.
Yeah, but I never saw one that was just, the whole thing was about the dog and the kids he left behind and all the things they did. It was really, really good. I should have brought it.
Yeah, that was kind of nice.
Yeah, that's good.
Anybody online like to share? You too. We're a little shy about this maybe. Okay, well, feel free to use the raise hand feature and the reactions button at the bottom if you'd like to share what you've written. I'll watch for your hands, a raised hand.
Everybody's gonna read it eventually, guys. Don't be shy. Did everybody come up with something that they feel pretty good about? Do you think the workshop was worthwhile?
Yes.
Yeah.
You got something good?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, 'cause I didn't
Very
know where
good.
to start and I would just need to clean it up. Yeah. it was
Perfect.
good.
I love the brainstorm.
Yeah, that's a
That
good one.
really was- Yeah.
I like the idea of including people in it who are going to read it and feel good about, not just you, but themselves.
That's right. When I read my first draft to my husband, he's like, "That's all you have to say about me?" I was like, "All right, let me put a couple more sentences in. Hold on." So you're right. It is important to consider all the people that would read it and how they may be impacted by who's in it or left out.
I mean, I might add a paragraph to my right. Whatever.
But that's a good idea, I think, what you said, just once you finish it, reading it to the people who are in your life now, to have them give you feedback and tell them how it makes them feel, so that way you are making them feel the way you want them.
For sure.
I guess I've always thought it was off out of the box or something like, here's the obituary. But
Yeah. And again, guys, this is just one thing that you can do to help prepare your survivors for these arrangements. There's over 100 tasks that need to be completed immediately following a death. So the more that you can get out of the way ahead of time, the better off you'll be. If anybody wants free planning guides, I have these personal planning guides that allow you to record scripture preferences, floral preferences, even just if you have a preference between burial or cremation, or if you want to record your grave space location for your family. Definitely a good idea to leave a set of instructions along with your obituary so that they have a full idea about what to do.
Not to take away from this, but if you have a second, can you talk about what a green funeral is?
Sure. So I'm on the board of the Connecticut Green Burial Grounds, and we're kind of in transition. So we started strong about 5 years or so ago, and we raised a whole bunch of money, and there is great interest in Connecticut for green burial. I guess I should start by letting you know what a green burial is. It's essentially just a natural burial. So no embalming, no artificial chemicals going into the remains, no casket, no outer burial container, just a real simple, maybe wrapping the remains in a shroud or a blanket and laying them in a shallow grave. So there's several cemeteries currently offering a green burial section, but no fully dedicated green burial cemetery. So I think now our mission is more to ask existing cemeteries if they could incorporate green burial options into what's already there, because establishing a new cemetery in Connecticut, I think, is impossible. If you guys have any connections to help, please call me. But we've been working pretty hard with soil scientists and real estate agents, and it's an act of God to establish a new cemetery in such a historic town. Yes.
But why a shallow grave, and what's the difference between that and what the Jewish people do with the pine box?
Shallow grave helps the decomposition process, so it kind of speeds it up, as opposed to a deeper grave would slow it down. So that's the idea, is kind of returning back to your natural state, or just encouraging the decomp. There's actually even mushroom burial suits that you could purchase to speed up the decomposition process even more. And in some states, not yet in Connecticut, they offer like, what are they called? Composting, like human composting, where there are farms that you drop the remains off. And I think it takes several weeks and they give you back wheelbarrows, plural, full of remains that you can then plant crops with. So really cool options. What makes it different than a Jewish burial is the coffin. So typically a Jewish funeral would include like a pine box. They do want something very simple. And then it's even at the Jewish cemeteries, a lot of them still will require what's called an outer burial container. So if anybody here has ever had to bury somebody before, most cemeteries require an outside enclosure that actually goes around the casket. So you've got the casket and then the outer enclosure. So in the Jewish tradition, even at the Jewish cemeteries, a lot of them still require that to maintain a flush ground and perpetual care. But what they'll do is they'll get like an open bottom container. So it's just a dome that goes over the casket. So it preserves the flush grounds, but you could still get the soil right against the pine box to encourage the decomposition. So they're most like a green burial, but still some differences.
We have a question from one of our online participants. Is there a website for green burial in Connecticut?
I think the website's currently down. They can go to my website. I've got a couple of blog posts about green burial. That's smartfuneralplanning.com. And I've got on that blog the names and numbers of the local cemeteries that currently offer green burial options, or they can email me and I can work with them directly.
So that was smart funeral planning, I missed it.
.com.
That's all. Okay. And would tombstones, I guess, would be part of it, or maybe they would be less showy? Or
For the green burials, again, it's always going to fall back on the cemetery guidelines. So there's like a green burial council that regulates national green burials, and they got all kinds of rules. In Connecticut, it's more cemetery to cemetery. They really lay down the laws for the specific spaces. So what was the question?
You answered it.
Okay.
I was guessing that tombstone, but it
Oh,
depends
so
upon the
some of the
cemetery.
cemeteries, they'll let you have natural colored stones. Some don't want anything unnatural, but you could always just get like a stone and place it there, stack stones to remember to kind of mark the spot. If you are at a cemetery, there should be an office or a ledger that keeps track of the exact geographic locations of the burials. So even without a grave marker, you can find close to where the remains were buried. Yes.
I have 4 cremation urns that I would love to know where I can spread the ashes legally. Do you have any idea where that could happen?
So everything is so gray. There aren't any black and white laws that say whether or not scattering cremated remains is legal or illegal. Technically, you need to be 2 nautical miles out at sea. If you're doing it in your backyard, you're safe. If you're doing it at a park that your loved one liked, you're probably safe. If you're going to Yankee Stadium, be discreet. I mean, I don't know. I think that most people that would catch you in the act would be sympathetic to the fact that you're memorializing your loved ones. So I think a lot of people do what they want, but I always say be careful and be discreet if you're doing it on like private property, get permission first. Something that is worth mentioning with the scattering is when you get cremated remains back, don't think of them as ashes. Everybody always says ashes, but they look more like cat litter or small, like ground up, like sand more. So if you're thinking about scattering at sea, there's a lot of wind at sea. So maybe consider getting like an urn that you can place in the water that would biodegrade or to kind of disintegrate over time. There's lots of options now. There's urns that you could plant that grow a tree. And then when you get the cremated remains back, whatever container you get them back in, they'll be in a plastic bag with a little zip tie and a disc. And that metal disc is going to have a number on it that the crematory gives you. And that number is like your social security number post-death. So you have this number that could be tied back to you. So even if you scatter the remains, take that disc and put it in your pocket so that, at that point, it could be anybody.
If you were to bury like cremation, do you need that outer thing too you're talking about? No.
You don't need it. Again, it all goes down to the cemetery. A lot of the times that like a light duty plastic container will be included in the cemetery's opening charges. So oftentimes if they charge $800 to dig open and close the grave, they'll provide you with a container to encase the urn in, because a lot of these urns are delicate. We even have some that are made of glass. So if you get an urn, consider where it's going, first of all, and maybe get something stone or marble or metal, something a little heavier. And then yes, you can purchase vaults for the urn, but it's not a requirement like it is with the casket.
I think we need another program on funerals.
I think so.
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
Does Connecticut allow acclimation? Where they dissolve in water?
Alkaline hydrolysis. Again, no hard rules, legal or not. However, I've got a funeral home partner in Stamford that was really interested and kind of got shot down. So the problem in Connecticut is we're one of the states where the laws require funeral homes and cemeteries to be separate entities. So we can't, some states, they have the funeral home and the cemetery all on one property. In Connecticut, it must be separate. And unless you've inherited a funeral home that has a crematory on site, it's hard to get permits and zoning passed for new crematories. So that's exactly the problem that a lot of funeral homes that want this alkaline hydrolysis as an option are facing. It's not a hard no, but they just don't have legislature written yet. So it's not really available. But thank you for asking. Hopefully soon.
This is a non-cemetery question. So Ancestry just lists information out there and adds it to their database when it comes to obituaries?
Yeah. So Ancestry and what's the other one? Legacy.com. They lift the information from funeral home websites and newspaper websites, and they kind of have this huge archive where they've collected all these obituaries. And I think moving forward, like I was talking about, we may see the landscape shift to where they're making a profit more than they are now. So right now they're acquiring all the data, but we have seen at trade shows them start to go to the funeral home saying, okay, where's my cut? So I don't think it'll be free forever, but for right now, yes, they just pull it off and it's pretty much automatically included. If it's anywhere publicly printed, they'll grab it and add it to their collection.
It's funny, but sometimes when I've gone online to get something at legacy.com, all of a sudden, a year to the date, they send me an email and tell me about that person, and if I want to do something else for them too. So I've gone online a lot to get.
That's kind of
people
cool.
that Don't have it in the paper. They'll say either go to, Bailey, home.com, and that's, I guess, through Legacy though, too, right?
I don't know how it all works
Yeah,
together.
Because I've gone like, say, to your funeral home or Wallingford or whatever, and then like a year to the date, I've gotten an email from Legacy telling me the person, like even like when my husband died, they did the same thing. They sent me a thing, an email.
That's really nice. Kind of
Yeah.
encouraging you to check on
To
that
check
person a
if
year
there's
later.
anybody else after the time that you don't go back and see what someone wrote. Like,
Yep.
feel like a little note. In there,
Mhm.
you might do it for the first month or so, and then you
Right.
forget, and somebody else might have found out about it 6 months later, and they put a little note in there.
That's
So you can
right.
go back and look and see.
Yeah, very cool.
Thank you.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you, everybody.